The time is just gone, 14 minutes past 8 as we kick off this morning on News and Views right here on Solar Media, taking a look at West Africa. Now, many of you will know by now Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, their exit from a regional bloc. And the writing is on the wall, and we are talking about the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS, and these military governments of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger announce their withdrawal from the regional bloc. Now, Vijay Prashad, who is a director at the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research, has written a piece talking about the Sahel region standing up and the world must pay attention. There is just so much that has been playing out in West Africa, like we've seen in many other parts of Africa, as a result of the legacy of colonialism and imperialism, which still persists. And right at the center of this entire saga is France, which has been accused of using ECOWAS to attack them. And we're going straight across to India, to Calcutta in India. We're joined by Vijay Prashad. Vijay, good morning to you and welcome. An absolute pleasure having you with us this morning right here on Salam Media.
It's great to be with you, Inayat. Love talking to anybody who's a left-arm fast bowler. So there you go.
Well, as long as you don't compare me to Jasprit Bumrah.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. When I'm batting, I don't dangle my bat off outside the off stump. So there we go.
Well, don't rub it in, but Vijay, let's talk about Africa. Let's talk about West Africa. And clearly, I mentioned the writing is on the wall for ECOWAS, the Economic Community of West African States. And clearly, this is a game changer. These three countries, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, obviously coming together, forming a new alliance of sort. And you've written quite extensively a very, very interesting piece, Vijay.
Yeah, I'm really glad to be able to talk about this because the news coverage about what's happening in Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, particularly in the, big media, has been abysmal. People are not trying to understand it from the perspective of the people in these countries. You well remember in 2011, the NATO powers led by the United States and France went in and destroyed Libya. And in destroying Libya, they opened a can of worms across northern Africa, including in the Sahel region, which sits just below the Sahara. I've been to the Sahel region several times. In fact, tried to cross the Sahara with much peril and discovered that this region is really held down by the French government. Niger, for instance, was effectively recolonized by France after the 1990s, recolonized in such a way that France effectively takes out the uranium from Niger and pays the country very little. As the head of government, Ibrahim Traoré from Mali said, Burkina Faso said at this meeting where the confederation was launched, he said, listen, we produce the resources to light your houses, but our streets are dark. And I think that statement by Traoré captures the essence of why people are upset. They're saying, we provide you with resources. What do we get out of it? Nothing. And instead, we'll get military occupation. We get US and French military bases. We get, this insistence that these countries collaborate with European countries to prevent African migration across the Sahara. They're getting nothing out of it. So the coups took place effectively with deep frustration, particularly against the French. And now they've created a confederation. But don't forget, these are three landlocked countries. And they are understanding this confederation not only politically or in terms of military strategy, but also economically. They need to figure out how are they going to develop their resources themselves? Can they do it in concert with each other? And how do they do it as a landlocked a set of countries? These are very serious issues that they are debating. But, Inayat, the main point is they are debating these issues. They are not having the issues discussed for them at the International Monetary Fund or in the French, treasury. They are going to grapple with their problems. And I think this is a real game changer in parts of the African continent, where we're now seeing a number of governments say we cannot allow ourselves to be exploited by foreigners. We need to figure out what we want to do with our resources for ourselves. I think that's why people need to pay attention to what's happening in the Sahel states.
Yes, Vijay. In fact, that exploitation has been taking on for far too long. And again, early on, I alluded to the legacy of colonialism. And we've seen it right across the African continent and the West African region in particular. And this is what you actually referred to in your article as a departure from subordination.
Yeah, I mean, what is subordination? Let's be pretty clear about that. To be subordinate means that somebody else is making your decisions for you. From at least the 1970s, many of the countries on the African continent have faced a particular strange predicament. Most countries have their own, finance departments, they have a ministry of finance, they have a central bank, and so on. But central bankers on the African continent, and I've talked to a number of them, all tell you that they are frustrated. They are not able to really generate the parameters of monetary policy. They are not able, as governments, to create their own tax policy. They get these things written for them by the International Monetary Fund, by the OECD, the Europeans in particular, and so on. They impose these structures on the countries. They say, this is how you must tax your people. You got to have more transparencies to corrupt. They use the word corruption as a way to dismantle the sovereignty of countries. It's not to say there isn't corruption here and there, but corruption isn't the real problem. The problem is these countries, they are sovereign countries, are rich countries. The Democratic Republic of the Congo is one of the world's richest countries. It has raw materials worth 24 trillion US dollars. That's a lot of money. Yet 60% of the people in the Democratic Republic of Congo live under the poverty line. How do you explain that? This doesn't have to do with corruption. This has to do with structured subordination of these countries to a Western agenda, which has allowed large multinational firms to exploit them, has prevented the development of working class militancy, of people making demands for themselves, and so on. In a sense, suppressed any kind of democratic activity. And here come these three countries, Burkina Faso, Niger, and Mali, where there are coup d'etats. And now the United States and the Europeans and others who have subordinated the economic policy of these countries, subordinated the democratic process of these countries, complain that the military coup has taken away democracy. But there was no democracy there to begin with. In fact, interestingly, these military coups, and I don't want anybody to assume that all military coups do this, but these military coups are not about suspending democracy. They, in fact, seem to be interested in enhancing at least a conversation about the economic decisions made in a country. So the West is bizarre. They get upset. Oh, there's a military coup in Burkina Faso. Let's use ECOWAS, the Economic Commission of Southwest Africa. Let's use ECOWAS to sanction, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger. But if there's a military coup that they like, then they back it. They're hypocritical to the core. In this case, as Yanis Varoufakis, former Greek finance minister, said, to make a coup, you don't always need tanks. You can do coups with the banks. And that has been happening from one African country to the next. Their finance ministries have been subordinated to banks, to creditors in the West, to the IMF, the OECD, and so on. And we need to reverse that process and bring back decision making to the very people who own the resources.
Yes, interesting. You speak about the coup d'etat and you speak about democracy. And on Wednesday, we hosted a broadcast, a 2-hour broadcast on the fallacy of Western style democracy. And it is clear that we are starting to see a new breed of African leadership emerging. And the coming together of Niger, Burkina Faso, and also Mali. actually demonstrates what this new breed of leadership in Africa can actually mean. Because I think it was one of the leaders, was it Traore, that spoke about imperialists, and you allude to that in your article as well, where they see Africa as an empire of slaves. So they've come to grips, and they've come to see the true ugly face of this so-called Western style democracy and what impact it's having on the African continent.
You know, frankly, I'm so impressed by Ibrahim Traore. He's born in 1983. He's a very young man, 40 some years old, extremely young man. And he's not afraid to use a language in public about imperialism, a term which, I just can't see, for instance, Cyril Ramaphosa, your president, using a term like imperialism in public. I think if I was standing next to him and said imperialism, he'd sniff. He would say, "Oh, this is a out of date term." But here's Ibrahim Traore quite openly saying, "You see us as an empire of slaves." I thought that line, which he said not in 1973, he wasn't born there, 10 years before his birth, but he said that this last Sunday. He said it this week effectively. Such a powerful line. It captures the situation, but he doesn't say it in a passive way. He doesn't say we are an empire of slaves. He says you see us as an empire of slaves, but we are not that. We are much more than that. In fact, we reject that characterization. I was so proud and happy to hear that language. It's forthright. It's not evasive. The evasiveness that has entered political discussions in so many of our countries is really quite irritating. If I can be quite blunt in it, it's irritating. Like, if I sit with you privately, you'll say, my God, the IMF is coming in and they squeeze us, and the US embassy squeezes us, and then Chase Manhattan Bank comes and they squeeze us. But you go out in public and you say, well, we have a great partnership with the United States government. I mean, that's evasive. Come out there and tell the truth. Why are you lying to your own people? Tell the truth about what's happening, in your country and so on. The scandal of the Lupito corridor, where the United States basically entered into an agreement made by Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo to build their own electric battery. United States wouldn't let this happen by itself. They insinuated themselves into this, and in order to essentially sideline the Chinese, they made a deal with the Angolan government to remove the minerals and metals from Zambia, including copper, cobalt, and coltan from Zambia and the Democratic Republic of Congo through Angola out of the continent. Whereas Zambia and the DRC were going to create out of their minerals an electric battery, but the US insinuated itself and undermined a project of regional sovereignty. That's, sorry to say it, but Kwame Nkrumah would be proud that we're using the term. That's neocolonialism. That's nothing other than neocolonialism. And I was so happy to hear Ibrahim Traore using the language of imperialism and colonialism and so on. He's not embarrassed to speak the truth.
Yes. Also, Vijay, just finally, uh, looking at the capacity and the ability for African leaders to fix their own problems. And we've seen this repeated over and over again, particularly coming through from the West, from the United States of America, that Africa does not have the ability to fix their own problems. And what these leaders through this block, they are actually saying the total opposite, that give us the opportunity, we can fix our own problems without your interference.
The first thing I just want to say is, when the British left India, when they were forced out of India in 1947, the literacy rate in India was 12.5%. Colonialism didn't prepare us, to go out there and become administrators. We had to struggle in the first decades to build a state. But before we could even do that, they started intervening and saying, you don't know how to do it. You are, impossible for you to build a state and so on. Similarly, in South Africa, it's not like the apartheid project, created administrators among the non-white population in South Africa. Apartheid was precisely the opposite of that, to prevent people from gaining the skills and so on. It takes time. You have to build skills. You have to sacrifice an enormous amount as the first, second, third generation out of independence. What happened in the Sahel region is just before this confederation was announced, they held a 3 day meeting of economists, of social scientists, of experts who had been in the finance world and so on. 3 day meeting of experts to come up with concrete proposals to deal with the question of currency, inter-border trade, regional trade, how as a landlocked area they're going to be able to survive, because they want to talk to anybody who has ideas. Gotta say this again. You know, it's very easy, very, very easy for people to criticize the first stage of post-colonial governments and saying, look at them, they keep failing, they're incompetent, they're corrupt. But the fact is that it takes a lot of effort to build a modern state out of the detritus, the racist detritus of colonialism. You know, I read magazines like The Economist, or you know, the newspapers like The Guardian and so on, when they criticize our country saying, look at these people, they're corrupt. That's a colonial viewpoint. You know, okay, there's corruption, but we are in a struggle to build modern societies in our own image. We don't need to be lectured at by the very people who held us back for centuries. I don't want their lectures anymore, nor do I want lectures from, you know, people within South Africa, people who think they are superior to others, to lecture about how things should be governed. It's as if they did a great job governing, you know, when they had absolute power as a racial minority, as if they did such a great job that now they need to lecture. We need to improve things ourselves. We don't need to be lectured at. That doesn't mean that you sit smugly and say everything's great. No, things are terrible, have to be improved. But we have the capacity to do it. We have to sacrifice a lot to deepen, to strengthen, and to build our capacity. And that, I think, is what the states of the Sahel are saying.
Well, Vijay, I just wish we had a lot more time. Really, it's just been fascinating talking, and I'm sure there's a lot that you can actually unpack for us this morning. But I'm sure going ahead, looking into the future, hopefully we will be touching base. And I must say, there's a video clip of yours that has been trending big time in South Africa. So, you know, you are a well-known figure in South Africa, and I'm sure we will definitely engage a lot more going into the future. But for now, we thank you. We do appreciate you taking time out this morning.
Always happy to be with you, and I take care of yourself.
You too. Vijay Prashad with us out of Kolkata this morning, talking about the Sahel region standing up, and also at the same time telling the world you need to pay attention. Next up, Hafiz Sadiq Saeed, who is on standby. We'll be back.